They talked about the Office of Outreach and dealing with discrimination within the agency.
And you're inclined to say no to that?
At this moment, I would think I would be.
Well, that, of course, wrongly ousted agricultural official Shirley Sherrod casting doubt on a return to the USDA. Sherrod's busy day in the media, culminating with a phone call with the president himself, providing the final gusts to the latest story blowing through our hurricane culture. We'll call this one Hurricane Shirley. This storm of controversy following a familiar and at this point predictable trajectory. A late-night blog post gathers steam online. It's whipped into a frenzy by the mainstream media, myself included, and blows up in real time, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. We all sympathize with the victims. We vilify the forces behind the storm. And then once it's petered out, we immediately turn to look for the next one coming. But ultimately, the difference between these fake hurricanes and a real one is that unlike a real hurricane, these fake storms distract us from the real damage being done to our society that the storm itself might be an indication of. Like this. The threat in this endless cycle just as sinister, but less visible than a Category 5 storm on the shore. Joining us now, editorial writer for The Washington Post, and might I add, intrepid reporter for The Washington Post today, hopped a car with Shirley Sherrod between studios earlier today, and from The Washington Examiner, editorial editor Mark Tapscott. Mark, a true pleasure to see you. Jonathan, I want to read a quote from your interview with her this morning. And she said this to you in the car about the president. He's the president of the United States. He doesn't have a responsibility to me. I think he has a responsibility to the country. If we don't get this together, if we don't figure this out in this country, where are we headed? How do we turn this, I sort of lovingly, jokingly call this Hurricane Shirley, and not just have it be another media storm and bad guys and good guys, but actually teach or learn in the teachable moment?
Well, you know, Mrs. Sherrod said that quote came after she talked about how it would have been nice if the president used this incident and other incidences to facilitate a discussion among the various groups so that we can start to get over the tensions that pull us apart every time one of these racial hurricanes come rolling through. Just a year ago, we were talking about how the Skip Gates and Jeff Crowley situation was a teachable moment, and before that, it was something else. And so she sees this. Actually, she said that she viewed that the president was running away from this conversation rather than looking at it as an opportunity to move forward.
Mark, how do we protect ourselves from this funny money hurricane culture? MSNBC is guilty. If we didn't cover a given hurricane, real or not, over a couple of days, we'd all be fired. We all know how Fox does business. CNN's not much better. The internet's the same thing. It's like an organism that's designed to go on massive alert, cackle like a bunch of chickens, and then move on to the next thing. And in the process, Rome burns. We don't deal with race. We don't actually understand the financial problems. We don't really understand the healthcare problems. We just provoke and stumble around. How do you resist the hurricane culture, if you will?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate Jonathan on getting that interview with Ms. Sherrod. That's journalism.
Thanks,
that's
Mark.
great. The problem here, the fundamental problem that is not discussed, it's never discussed, is this. We have, as a matter of official public policy, a policy of racial discrimination in our government. We just saw in the financial reform bill that it includes a provision that establishes a whole new bunch of government employees who are going to be monitoring private employers on the basis of their hiring, whether they're hiring sufficient numbers of people on the basis of their race. We have race as an official policy, and until we all acknowledge that and then talk about, is that what it should be, we're going to keep having these storms.
But the entire machine, Jonathan, is not designed to solve any of these problems. The entire machine is designed to declare the sky falling, cover the sky as it falls, and then look for the next piece of falling sky and never actually deal with the reason why the sky is falling, whether it's Mark's analysis or anybody else's.
Or to cover something that you're saying, or to use the sky is falling as a cover to maintain the imbalances in institutional card game that pits the powerful against the powerless, for lack of a better analogy, so that you keep the status quo going, the bad status quo.
Do you have any? Go ahead, Mark.
Let me just suggest that, this whole analogy of the bad status quo and the powerful versus the unpowerful, the fundamental issue is always, is the person who's been wronged because of their race. And what I'm pointing to is the obsession with the question of race is forced upon us in every aspect of our society, because that's, number one, we have historical reasons for addressing it, and number two, because the government keeps putting it in front of us as a matter of policy. We've got to discuss that.
So go ahead, Jonathan.
I was going to say, so how can we have this discussion without it degenerating into lots of finger pointing and yelling and screaming? I've often said, I recognize that discussing race is a very uncomfortable situation and that it requires trust. And we as a nation do not trust each other to have this conversation.
I would argue that you would have to acknowledge what Mark's discussing, but I think more importantly, and this is just my opinion, Jonathan, until we acknowledge that every single human being in or on this planet, forget in this country, has a basic preference for things that are familiar to them, including the nature, the look, the feel of the people around them, and has a human preference to be anxious or averse to the other. Now, in many people that may be very modest, in other people it may be more extreme. But until we acknowledge that it's human nature to be attracted to the familiar and potentially anxious about the unknown, and then move forward from there, I don't see how you can deal with it. Because if we deny, if you're inherently morally a bad person because you have anxiety around people that are not like you and you're more comfortable around people that are like you, whether it's race, gender, or anything else, well, then how can you even play the game?
Dylan, I think you just pointed to the fundamental problem that we have. We can't talk about it because we've talked about it for so long and in such oblique ways that when we disagree with each other, we call each other racist. That is the default criticism in our political culture today.
It shuts down all conversations.
Exactly.
Right there, and that's what's unfortunate, because it happens almost on a daily basis.
And until we all take a step back and say, look, the issue is, are we or are we not going to make race the deciding factor in things like employment decisions in government and outside of government? Until we do that, without assuming the other guy is the bad guy, we're going to stay in this cycle of storms.
Yeah. All right, listen, thanks for the conversation, gentlemen. We will do our best. I'm sure the three of us will do our best. Still